Hungarian Folk Tales. First the dance, then the feast. Once upon a time there lived a poor man. He had even more children than a sieve has holes, and he owned nothing more than a small house. But then the poor man was forced to move out of his home because his landlord wanted so much corn in payment for his rent that he had to leave. And so the poor man decided to hide. In the forest, he met an old man, and the old man asked the poor man where he was going. The poor man told him about his landlord's cruelty. "Don't be so sad, poor man, because I shall give you a fiddle, and whenever you play it, your landlord will dance." The poor man happily took the fiddle, but told the old man that he was still very hungry indeed and he could not return home with a fiddle. Then the old man gave him the gift of a table. "Whatever you wish for will appear on this table." So the poor man slapped his hand hard on the table and shouted, "Porridge and beans." And when the poor man's belly was full, he set off to go home. When the poor man arrived, he discovered that his cruel landlord had already evicted his dear wife and darling children. "Now I shall pay and you shall dance," and the poor man began to fiddle. And the poor man's landlord danced and danced and danced and grew very tired indeed. But as the poor man played as long as he could, his landlord kept on dancing. When the poor man took a rest, the landlord ran back to the mayor's office to report that he wouldn't stop fiddling. But the poor man followed the landlord back to the office and began to fiddle again. "Dance, landlord, dance!" Then the landlord danced into the office and shouted. The men in the office soon grew bored with the poor man's fiddling and they ordered him to leave at once. "Now you should dance too," the poor man commanded. And everyone in the mayor's office began to dance around. They put down their pens and danced a merry jig together. Then the policeman heard the news and ran to the mayor's office. "Get out of here, poor man!" But the poor man shouted, "Now you should dance too!" And the policemen all began to dance around. The women sent word for policemen to come from the next village, and these policemen soon arrived and tried to chase the poor man away. "Now you should dance too!" Now the whole marketplace was filled with people dancing around. Then the soldiers marched up and the poor man said, "Now you should dance too, as best you can." News of the dancing finally found its way to the king's ears. "Now the king should dance too," the poor man demanded. So the king joined in the frantic dance. The queen of the kingdom contacted the king from the neighbouring land, and this king arrived with his army, and the country was soon filled with his foreign soldiers. The second king called upon the poor man to desist. The two dancing kings put their crowns down at his feet and gave him their lands. So peace returned and the dancing eventually ended. Now all the dancers had grown so hungry and asked the poor man to feed them at last. The poor man took out his table, slapped it and said, "Porridge and beans." Then everyone sat down to enjoy the meal, and the tiny table made more and more and more of the food. The people standing next to the table were lucky, but the ones at the back could not reach the porridge pot, and the people pushed the kings into the beans. The king's shouts were soon drowned out, and both kings drowned in the big pot of beans. No one felt sad that the kings had gone, and all pushed forward to eat their fill. Everyone ate and ate till all was gone, and they all had a splendid time indeed. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Poor Man's Vineyard. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there lived a poor man who had 3 sons. The poor man had a tiny vineyard, but he owned no more than that. And he guarded his vineyard as if it were gold. His sons would also take turns to stand watch at the vineyard all day and all night. One morning, it was his eldest son's turn to guard the vineyard, and the boy sat down and started to eat. While he was eating, a frog hopped out in front of him and said, "Give me a bite of bread, young man. I haven't eaten for 2 long weeks." "When pigs learn to fly," said the young fellow, and he chased the frog away. The frog left in silence and the boy fell fast asleep. When he woke again, the vineyard had been so badly ravaged that the boy was filled with fear. Next day, the middle boy went to the vineyard. He too was asked for bread by the frog, but he also chased the frog away and threw a stone at the beast. Then he lay down, fell asleep, and when he awoke, less than half the vineyard remained. "Hey," the poor man moaned, "all we have is this tiny vineyard, and they can't even look after that." Then the youngest boy said, "Worry not, father. What is left will be safe now, for I shall guard it." So the youngest son went to the vineyard, sat down to eat, and the frog hopped out and asked him for bread. "But of course, here, take some." Then he broke off a crust and gave it happily to the frog. "Eat, frog, for you are one of God's creatures too. You are a good boy, and you will be rewarded for your kindness in time. Now I shall give you 1 copper, 1 silver, and 1 golden rod. During the night, 3 horses will come, 1 with a copper mane, 1 with a silver mane, and 1 with a mane of gold. They will come to trample your vines, but if you strike them with these rods, they will be tamed in an instant." The night came at last, and the 3 horses galloped in, kicked and neighed and threw earth up into the starry sky. But the youngest son was soon to act and hit hard at them with all 3 rods. Then the horses were tame and stood and stared like 3 simple sheep. "Don't hurt us," the horses pleaded. "But should you need help, wave the rods in the air and we will appear." Then the boy went home. But the youngest son decided not to tell his brothers and his father of what had happened that night. All three were surprised by the crop that was so abundant they could barely gather it in. And no one in the village had vines as rich as theirs. Time passed slowly by, and one day the king decided to erect a pine tree outside the church. Then he placed a golden sprig of rosemary atop the pine tree and told the world that he would give his daughter's hand in marriage to the first man who could snatch the golden rosemary from atop the pine tree. All manner of men tried their hand, but none could jump higher than half the height required. And when all of them had crept away in shame, a fine fellow appeared on a copper-haired horse. He wore a copper helmet so his face could not be seen. Then he spurred his horse on, leapt high in the air, snatched the golden rosemary and rode away. The copper knight was the poor man's youngest son, of course. He went home in his tattered clothes and was sitting in the corner when his father and two brothers returned to the house, because they too had witnessed the joust. His brothers told the youngest one what they had seen. "I too saw what happened. But how is that so?" "Because I stood atop the fence and watched from there." His brothers were so furious that they smashed the fence to stop him watching again. The next Sunday, the king placed a golden apple on an even taller tree. Many men tried their hand, but all again in vain. But as they walked away in shame, a knight appeared aback a silver-haired horse, and the knight wore a silver helmet to hide his face. With one jump, he grabbed the golden apple and vanished. By the time his father and brothers returned, the youngest son was sitting in the corner again. They quickly regaled him of what they had seen, invisible to him from the corner. "Oh, I saw it better than both of you. How is that so? I climbed atop the pigsty roof." The brothers were so furious that they tore the pigsty down to stop him watching from there again. The third Sunday came and the king put a golden scarf atop the tallest pine tree. And it was the poor man's youngest son who again snatched it off. He escaped and recognised again because he rode a golden-haired horse and a golden helmet to hide his face. At home, the brothers both bragged of what they had seen. "I saw it better than both of you." "How is that so?" "Where from?" "From atop the house roof, of course." His brothers were so furious that then they pulled the roof to pieces. Meanwhile, the king declared that the knight should appear who had taken the golden rosemary, the golden apple, and the golden scarf. But the days became weeks, the weeks months, and no one came forth. Then the king summoned all the men in the land to his palace. But the famous knight was still not among them. All of them gone, a young man appeared with hair and clothes of gleaming gold. The golden rosemary in his hat, he led his horse with the golden scarf, and he held the golden apple in his hand. Thank heaven he had appeared at last. The king was delighted and the princess overjoyed. The wedding was held the very next day. The king gave the golden knight half of his kingdom, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The pin, the dog, the crayfish, the egg and the cockerel. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, there was a little pin that was very bored in the sewing box. And the little pin thought it would go out and see the world. The pin walked and walked, and as it was walking along, it met a dog, and the dog said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and as they were walking, they met a crayfish. The crayfish said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking along when they met a rotten egg. The egg said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the wide world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking when they met a cockerel. The cockerel said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go too." "Please do." They walked and walked until they arrived in the back of beyond, and night began to fall around them and the sky grew dark. The four of them looked for a place to lay their heads for the night, but they found themselves in a vast forest and searched for a place to sleep. Then they caught sight of a cottage where they decided to go and ask for shelter. They walked into the cottage, but found that it was empty inside. "It doesn't matter that no one's at home, we can still sleep here for the night." And each found a place to lay its head. The pin stuck into a towel, the egg rolled into the ashes, the crayfish sat in the wash basin, the cockerel roosted on top of the fence, and the dog lay down on the shady porch. Then they all fell fast asleep because they were tired from all the walking they had done that day. The cottage was owned by 3 foxes that had gone down into the town to steal chickens from farms as the darkness descended. Now the 3 foxes came running home. As they ran, twigs cracked under their feet, and the cockerel heard them approaching and crowed a warning to its friends. The foxes stopped for a second when they heard the crowing, but then they ran quickly on. Then the dog took notice and began to bark. The foxes stopped again when they heard the dogs barking. What could be happening at the cottage, they thought. But then they carried quickly on. When the foxes arrived, the cockerel crowed, the dogs snapped at their heels, but they carried quickly on into the cottage. But a terrible surprise still awaited them. The father fox said to its son, "Quickly go and look for a coal in the ashes, that we can light a lamp and see what's happening in the cottage." One of the fox's sons went to the fireplace and sorted through the ashes. But the egg blew up in the fox's face, so it ran to the basin for water where the crayfish lay that pinched the fox hard. It tried and tried to shake the crayfish from its paw, It grabbed the towel to dry itself and the pin pricked it sharply. Run away! We need to run from this terrible place. And the foxes ran and ran and ran away and may still be running till this very day.